I live on the outskirts of a small highway town in northern Utah. It's a quiet place with just a handful of stores, a few truck stops, and a motel lining the main road. The paths leading away from town are dirt, winding past a few homes and vast stretches of forest and open fields. This was just another ordinary day for me. I worked from home and finished up around 6 p.m. Afterward, I drove into town to pick up some groceries and restock a few essentials for my house, even though it's a highway town. The traffic on the road was light, so the stores were never too busy. As I was shopping, I noticed a man glancing at me. At first, I brushed it off, thinking I had just caught his eye at an awkward moment. A few minutes later, though, I spotted him again in a different aisle. He walked into the same empty space I was in, standing about 5 or 6 feet away. I focused on my shopping, but it struck me that he wasn't picking up anything. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced his way. Even though I wasn't staring directly at him, I could feel his gaze on me. I decided to greet him with a quick "Hi," but he didn't reply. I quickly grabbed what I needed and exited the aisle. He was definitely a bit odd, but I didn't let it bother me too much. I made my way to the checkout, paid for my items, and headed back to my car, parking in my usual spot at the back of the lot. I tossed my bags in the trunk and climbed into the driver's seat. As I scanned the parking lot, I noticed around 30 or 40 cars, but something felt off. Then I spotted him again, standing between a couple of vehicles, staring in my direction. He didn't have any groceries, so I figured he hadn't even checked out. What was his deal? Probably just a weary trucker on minimal sleep, I thought. I pulled out of the parking lot and started my journey home. By now, the sun had mostly set, leaving the dirt roads dark and quiet. Once I parked in front of my house, I grabbed the first couple of grocery bags and started putting them away when my dad called, distracting me for a moment. After wrapping up the call, I went back outside for the rest of the groceries. That's when I noticed something unusual. I squinted to adjust to the darkness and saw a truck parked off to the side of the dirt road, its lights off. I could only make out its shape against the night sky. Since I own nearly 40 acres, that truck was on my property, and it definitely wasn't there when I drove in. If it had been lost or turning around, why was it parked with no lights? I cautiously approached my car to grab the remaining groceries, keeping a watchful eye on the truck. The best explanation I could come up with was that it might be a driver who had pulled off the highway, choosing my empty land as a spot to rest instead of paying for a motel. Though it was on my property, I figured I wouldn't make a fuss unless necessary. You never know who might be inside or what could happen. As I arrived at the cabin, dusk was settling in, and a wave of relief washed over me. I had finally reached my destination. The cabin was charming and welcoming, tucked away among the trees. I unloaded my bags and made myself comfortable, soaking in the tranquil atmosphere. After a long day on the road, I was eager to unwind. I whipped up a quick dinner and switched on the TV, hoping to relax before calling it a night. Yet, as I sat there, an unsettling sensation crept over me, as if I were being watched. I dismissed it as mere paranoia from the lengthy drive. Eventually, I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, trying to push the disquieting thoughts aside. As I approached the cabin, it was evident that a row of large pine trees had been meticulously planted along the front, framing the gravel driveway that cut right through the middle. The combination of the cabin's exterior and the surrounding landscape gave off a slightly eerie vibe. I parked the car and unlocked the padlock using the code I had received via email from the host. Inside, however, was a pleasant surprise. The cabin was newly renovated, likely intended for Airbnb guests, and it was quite charming. Small, yet cozy. It felt like a nice retreat. Since I was only staying for the night, I didn't unpack much. I settled at the table to enjoy a meal I had picked up from a drive-thru. Just 10 minutes after I got comfortable, a sudden knock on the door startled me. I hadn't heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. I stood up and opened the door to find a man in his 40s, sporting a gray and black beard and a shaved head. "Hi there. I just wanted to check in and make sure everything's okay," he said with a friendly smile. Now that I knew he was the host, I assured him that all was well and wished him a good night before closing the door. It struck me as a bit odd that he would drop by unannounced just to check on me, but perhaps he lived nearby or on the other side of the property. I also noticed he had a rather strong scent about him, reminiscent of someone who had been laboring outdoors all day, which added to the strangeness of the encounter. I returned to the table to finish my meal, then took a shower to unwind for the evening. After just 5 minutes, I felt sleepy and ready for bed. I dried off and crawled under the covers, scrolling on my phone for a bit, when, once again, there came a knock at the front door. This time, it startled me just as much as before. Once again, I hadn't heard a vehicle or footsteps outside. It had to be the host again, but why was he back so soon? I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I checked my phone for any messages, but there was nothing. Slowly, I walked into the main room, hearing him knock several more times. Unsure whether to answer, I ultimately called out from behind the door, asking what he wanted. He stopped knocking. "Could you open the door, please?" "I just have one more quick question, I promise," he replied. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. After a few tense moments, his impatience surfaced as he knocked again, asking if I could let him in. I told him it was late and that I preferred to be left alone unless it was an emergency. The silence that followed was unsettling. As the seconds stretched into a full minute, my discomfort grew. I didn't hear him walk away. Was he just lingering out there? I quietly approached the door and peered through the small window. To my surprise, he was gone. I thought he must have slipped away, but I would have heard him on the gravel if he had walked off. Confused and anxious, I stood by the door, straining to hear anything. I was afraid to move, but then my gaze fell on one of the living room windows, and I froze. There he was, his eyes locked onto mine. Panicked and dashed to the bedroom to call 911. While I waited for help, I heard a noise that sounded like someone trying to open the window, which was both terrifying and strange, since he must have had a key to his own home. That's when it hit me. The man wasn't the host. The police confirmed my suspicion when they arrived, but he had already fled. We had no idea which way he went, so we reached out to the actual host and owner of the cabin. I can only speculate about his intentions that night. Clearly, he was deceiving us and had something planned, but I'm just thankful I didn't open the door. It was spring break, and I was 18. This year, my family decided to spend the week in a small cabin in Minnesota. It was just me, my mom, and my younger brother, who was only 7. We planned to explore some small towns and scout potential places to move in the future. The cabin my mom booked was new to us, and I don't think she realized how remote it was from the nearest towns. She was probably more focused on the cost. It was located quite far north, about 35 minutes from any shopping areas. I suppose it was a good opportunity to see how we'd adapt to rural life. The drive took us just over 10 hours. I drove the first few hours, and then my mom took over. We arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting. The view was stunning, with orange skies painting the dense forest, a stark contrast to the skyscrapers and office buildings we were used to. The cabin itself was quite old. Everything creaked, and it didn't seem professionally built, but it was a cabin after all. We settled in for the night, lit the wood-burning fireplace, and relaxed after our long journey. I ended up napping most of the evening. My mom went to bed around 8:30, but since I had taken a long nap, I stayed up a little longer. My little brother was already in his room, leaving me alone in the cabin. I spent some time by the fireplace on my phone before deciding to step out for some fresh air on the back porch. It was a small wooden deck with a somewhat rickety fire pit in the center and a few chairs scattered around. I sat down and gazed into the forest. The night was incredibly quiet. No cars or bustling streets, just the occasional bird call and the rustling of the trees in the wind. I loved it. Being further north, though, it was chillier than I anticipated. I noticed some logs stacked next to the cabin and thought I'd try out the fire pit. I managed to light it easily, and the fire burned steadily in the center, proving it wasn't as sketchy as I'd first thought. I enjoyed sitting by it, soaking in the peaceful atmosphere. After about 30 minutes outside, I suddenly heard a bizarre sound coming from deep within the forest. I had no idea what it was, but it resonated through the trees like an axe chopping wood. It was just a single sound, and I doubted anyone could be out there near us. The darkness made it impossible to see anything, but whatever it was, it sounded alarmingly close. As I lingered outside, just 5 minutes after hearing that unsettling noise, I felt my anxiety start to rise. It was an uncomfortable sensation that shattered the tranquility I had been enjoying. I decided to extinguish the fire pit and retreat to the cabin. From what I could tell, my mom and brother were already fast asleep. I, however, wasn't feeling particularly tired. Maybe it was due to the long nap I had earlier, or perhaps that strange sound had jolted me awake. But I just wasn't ready to hit the hay yet. Instead, I settled into the living room with my phone. I had some movies downloaded, so I didn't have to stress about Wi-Fi. About 15 minutes in, I heard something again. I paused the movie and listened closely. I couldn't tell if it was just the cabin creaking from someone stirring in their room, or if it was the wind brushing against the walls, but that uneasy feeling crept back in. I wasn't accustomed to this kind of setting, which probably explained why I was feeling so jumpy. A minute later, I heard it again, this time from the opposite side of the cabin, not near the bedrooms, but right outside the wall, next to me. There was just a window there, I leaned in to listen more intently, and just as I thought I might be imagining things, a series of loud knocks rattled the front door. The sound reverberated through the wooden walls. I froze for a moment until I heard my mom rush out of her room asking what that was. I was standing by then, sensing that something was off, and told her someone was at the door. I could see she was frightened too. She quickly went to grab her phone and call 911, realizing there was no reason for anyone to be banging on our cabin door in the middle of nowhere at night. As she did that, I crept up to the door and peered through the peephole. It was pitch black outside, no porch lights illuminating anything, but I could make out a man standing close by, just staring at the door. In the dim light, I noticed the outline of a heavy wooden axe in his hand. My heart raced and my anxiety shot up. My mind raced, trying to concoct any explanation other than the obvious. Maybe he was lost or needed help. Yet nothing seemed to justify this situation as anything but dire. The man continued to pound on the door while my mom was still on the phone with the operator. They didn't say a word, just kept knocking aggressively. In that tense moment, it was impossible to gauge how much time had passed. It felt like an eternity. Then came the moment we all dreaded. A loud crack echoed as the axe made contact with the door, piercing through the wood. In sheer panic, we bolted into the farthest room and locked ourselves inside. We heard several more hits against the door, maybe 4 or 5, before they abruptly stopped. We weren't sure if he had broken in or if he had given up, so we waited in tense silence. It took just under 15 minutes for the first officer to arrive, which was surprisingly quick, given how remote we were. The front door bore several deep gashes, but thankfully there were no signs that the man had gotten inside. There was also no indication of where he had gone. It was assumed he simply wandered back into the forest. The prevailing theory was that he had noticed my campfire from a distance, which had drawn him to our cabin. The situation wasn't clear. What was he doing out there at night with an axe? Or why did he approach the cabin? We wouldn't have any answers unless he got caught and interrogated. Naturally, we didn't stick around any longer. Just so you know, we also decided against moving there. This all happened last January. I live in a cozy little house in a small wooded town about 45 minutes from the city. I had a short workday, so I was looking forward to a relaxing evening at home. Around 7 p.m., I received an unexpected call from a friend. He was having car trouble and asked if I could pick him up and maybe grab a bite to eat. I was happy to help and assured him I'd be over shortly. This wasn't our first rodeo, so I was used to these late-night favors. I grabbed my jacket from the closet, picked up my keys, and headed for the front door. As soon as I opened it, I jumped. There stood a man, right on my porch, barely a foot away. He wore a heavy coat and a black gaiter scarf that covered his lower face. He didn't move at all, almost as startled as I was. For a moment, I felt a twinge of embarrassment for being so spooked, but curiosity quickly took over. Before I could ask what he wanted, he apologized and said he was just about to knock. I reassured him it was fine and asked how I could help. He paused for a moment before asking if I was David or Daryl or something like that. Whoever he was looking for, it definitely wasn't me. I told him no, and he simply replied, "Okay, before walking off the porch. I stepped outside, locked the door behind me, and waited until he was far down the driveway before getting into my car. I couldn't shake that strange encounter during the drive to my friend's place. My house was in a secluded area, so it was unusual for random people to wander up to homes nestled deep in the woods. If he was just looking for someone else, that would make sense. I picked up my friend and we grabbed a quick bite at Culver's before I dropped him off around 9 p.m. The snow was lightly falling, but overall, it was a calm night. When I returned home, I parked the car and walked up to the front door, unlocking it and stepping inside. After taking a moment to warm up, I plopped down on the couch and turned on the TV. I lost track of time since I didn't have to work the next day, but I estimated I spent about 2 hours on the couch before feeling sleepy. I got up, stretched, turned off the TV, and started toward the stairs. Just as I passed the front door, the memory of that man from earlier hit me. I had almost forgotten about him until now. Feeling uneasy, I walked over to the door and peeked through the peephole. The porch was empty, and the night remained calm, with soft snow still falling and little wind. But then I noticed something moving across the driveway. It wasn't clear, so I opened the door for a better look. I spotted footprints in the dusting of snow. They appeared to trail all the way up the driveway from the road near my car. They were still fast asleep. As the hours of the night slipped by, I heard the familiar creaks of the house settling. But then, something unusual caught my attention. A noise was coming from the front door, as if someone was trying to open it. My heart raced as I stood up to listen intently. I glanced at the clock. It was well past 10 p.m. The parents were supposed to be out for at least another couple of hours. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the sound continued. It was faint, yet there was definitely someone at the door. Panic washed over me. Should I call the parents? The police? I hesitated, unsure what to do. The idea of waking the kids filled me with dread. Instead, I quietly moved toward the front door, hoping to catch a glimpse of who was there. I peered through the peephole, but all I saw was darkness. The noise stopped, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was just the wind. But then came a soft knock, followed by a voice. "Hello? Is anyone home?" Chills ran down my spine. I froze, my mind racing. Should I answer? What if it was someone dangerous? I held my breath, wishing they would just go away. But the knocking persisted, growing more urgent. My instinct screamed at me to remain silent, to hide. I crept back to the living room, trying to keep my breathing calm. My heart thudded loudly in my ears. I grabbed my phone, prepared to call for help if things took a turn for the worse. The knocking escalated into banging, and I could feel the floor trembling beneath me. I knew I had to act quickly. I glanced over at the kids' room. They were still peacefully asleep. Making my way to the back of the house, I sought an escape route. As I reached the kitchen, I heard the front door begin to splinter. They seemed to be doing fine, but less than an hour later, I received a call from the mother. Naturally, I answered, but I was puzzled when she asked if I had just called her. I replied that I hadn't. I was still at the house and hadn't made any calls. Apparently, she had received a call from an unknown number, but the caller hadn't said anything when she picked up. She speculated that I might have a new phone or was using a different one, causing the call to not come through properly. I reassured her that everything was fine on our end, and she said okay, before hanging up. I thought little of it, assuming she was just a concerned parent checking in. I did another quick check on the kid and settled back down. About 20 minutes later, while I was watching a video on my phone, I noticed headlights illuminating the front windows. The light filtered through the blinds, and at first, I thought it was just a neighbor arriving home. However, after a few minutes of the headlights still shining in, I got up to peek out the window. A dark gray sedan was parked right at the curb. It looked old and rusty, with tinted windows. I focused on the car for a moment and almost overlooked the man standing a few feet away from it, closer to the end of the driveway and gazing up at the house. I felt a twinge of concern, but didn't want to confront him since it wasn't my home. So I simply observed from the window. After a minute, he walked back to his car and got in. Strangely, he pulled away slowly, as if still fixated on the house. I watched as the headlights disappeared down the road, weaving in and out of the trees, only to stop again. The light remained stationary far down the road before eventually shutting off, as if he had parked and gotten out. Maybe he was someone visiting a neighbor who had lost their way. It felt a bit odd, so I lingered by the window for about 5 minutes. But when I didn't see the man return to the house, I chalked it up to a coincidence. I returned to the chair in the living room, contemplating whether to text the parents, but I hesitated, not wanting to alarm them over what was likely nothing. Plus, it probably wouldn't change anything. I decided to turn on the TV at a low volume to avoid waking the kid. A few minutes later, I opened the blinds again, still preoccupied with my earlier thoughts. An hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours, passed without incident. I just waited in the living room with the TV on, trying my best to stay awake. My eyelids were growing heavy, and I could tell I was on the verge of dozing off, barely aware, but still somewhat conscious. Suddenly, I heard a light thump that didn't quite rouse me until it happened again. My eyes widened as I got up, unsure of what it was, but I decided to check on the kid first and headed toward the stairs. As I walked through the hallway, I heard the noise again and caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw someone outside the back door tugging on the handle and staring directly at me. As soon as he realized I was watching him, he began to pull on the handle even harder, trying to force it open. My heart raced as adrenaline surged through me, and I dashed up the stairs. I burst into the room and scooped up the child, doing my best to keep them calm. As I held them, the thuds grew louder, sounding like someone was trying to break down the door. Holding the kid tightly, I rushed down the stairs. When I reached the bottom, a final sound echoed behind me, something like cracking plastic and metal. I glanced back toward the front door, only to see the back door swing open and a man rush in. He was dressed casually with dark hair, but it was the knife in his hand that caught my attention. Without a moment's pause, he charged at me. I bolted out the front door, jumped into my car, and backed out just as he reached my window. Once I was safe, I drove to a secure location and called 911 and the child's parents. Of course, he had vanished before anyone arrived. To me, it felt like he intended to use that knife to threaten or even harm me while trying to kidnap the child. But how did he know the parents would be away? And why this specific child? Oddly enough, after that night, the parents cut off all communication with me and never hired me again. They expressed their gratitude immediately after the incident, but then went completely silent, as if they were trying to hide something. I tried to investigate, but found little. The only lead was that the mother had previously been married to a man who looked somewhat like the intruder, but that's just conjecture. It's been years now, and I doubt we'll ever find out the truth. This all unfolded during a solo road trip I took last year from Wisconsin to Montana. Most of the roads were desolate, except for the first and last hour of the trip. The middle stretch was mostly forest and open fields, with a few small mountains as I moved west. I had planned to drive through the night and part of the day to avoid the hassle of spending an extra night in a hotel. I knew it would be challenging, but I figured it was worth it. I hit the road at 7 p.m., double-checking that I had everything packed and my snacks within reach. The first hour took me through the city and small towns, but soon I was on the open road. Cars were scarce, and the only stops were gas stations about every 15 miles. After a couple of hours, I had barely used a third of my gas tank, but with stations becoming increasingly rare, I decided to fill up before entering the more desolate part of my journey. It took 20 minutes to find a station which was completely deserted, just a run-down place with 4 pumps and a closed convenience store. I parked at one of the pumps and started filling my tank. The gas flowed painfully slowly, almost a minute for just 1 gallon. I leaned against my car, waiting, when suddenly another vehicle appeared on the road. They were clearly going well below the speed limit of 55, maybe only 20 or 30 miles per hour. At first, they passed the gas station, but then slowed down and backed up, which struck me as odd and a bit hazardous on a dark, lonely road. They backed up to the entrance and pulled into the station, parking at the pump right behind me. I thought they must have missed the entrance and were in desperate need of gas. Keeping my eyes on my own pump, I heard someone get out and walk to the side of their car. After a minute of silence, no gas pumping or even movement, I turned to see what was going on. A tall man in a gray flannel shirt and black jeans was staring at me. The moment I glanced over, our eyes met. I gave him an awkward smile and a nod before looking away again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. After what felt like an eternity, I finally heard him grab the pump and start filling his tank. I felt a wave of relief, thinking maybe he was just here for gas, and I was overreacting. I stood there for another minute before deciding I had waited long enough. I pulled the pump from my car and locked my gas cap. Just then, I caught the man's gaze again. His eyes looked heavy and dull, as if he were exhausted, yet wired on caffeine. I got into my car and pulled back onto the road, dismissing him as a weird encounter. As I drove over the next 3 hours, the rain began to fall. After 5 hours on the road, it was just past midnight, and the rain made me feel like I needed to concentrate harder, which was draining. I tried sipping on an energy drink and snacking, but it didn't help much. By 1 a.m., I was in desperate need of a break, and my gas was running low. I continued down the long, lonely road until I finally spotted a gas station. It looked run down and was as deserted as the last one, but the lights were on. I filled up my tank and parked next to the small building. I checked the weather to see how long the rain would last and searched for nearby towns, but there were none, just emptiness. Figuring a quick 30-minute nap would do me good, and hoping the rain might ease up, I leaned back and fell asleep. When I woke up, the rain was still pounding against the roof, and my alarm hadn't gone off yet. It had only been about 25 minutes. I sat up and peered out the windshield. Everything was eerily quiet, except for a car at one of the pumps. Leaning forward for a better look, I was almost certain it was the same one from the earlier stop. It felt like either a strange coincidence or something more unsettling. Oddly, the man wasn't in his car or anywhere outside. My heart raced. Where could he be? There was nowhere else for him to go at this deserted gas station. Unsettled, I decided I didn't want to find out. I turned on my car and put it in reverse. But as I glanced in the mirror while backing out, my blood ran cold. He was in my back seat, his eyes cutting through the darkness. I jumped forward, flung my door open, and leaped onto the pavement. My car was still in reverse, slowly rolling back. I took off running into the woods, glancing back to see my car continue to roll before it abruptly stopped. Moments later, I watched as he drove away, leaving me stranded at this desolate gas station, heart pounding and mind racing. I stood in the cozy little space, soaking in my surroundings. The air was thick with a musty scent, a mix of damp wood and decay. I opened the windows to welcome in some fresh air, and the view was just as stunning from the inside. I could see the treetops gently swaying in the breeze, accompanied by the soothing sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the distant gurgle of a stream. After a moment, I laid out my sleeping bag on the bed, trying to make the most of the situation. As night began to settle in, I fired up a small camp stove to cook dinner, the flickering light casting playful shadows around the room. A blend of excitement and unease washed over me. I was alone in a space that felt both serene and slightly eerie. Once I finished my meal, I decided to step outside and take in the night sky. The stars sparkled brilliantly against the dark backdrop, and the Milky Way stretched majestically across the heavens. I took a deep breath, feeling a wave of gratitude for this moment of solitude and beauty. Yet, as I stood there, an unsettling feeling crept in. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't entirely alone. The woods buzzed with life, amplifying my awareness of the vulnerability I felt in this remote spot. Eventually, I made my way back inside and locked the door behind me. I snuggled into my sleeping bag, listening to the chorus of night sounds, hoping the calmness would lull me to sleep. But as I lay there, my mind raced with thoughts of the day and the strange, lingering unease that refused to fade. Moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The night was still, but the eerie silence was palpable. I strained to listen, hoping to catch any sound that might give away the person's location. I peered into the darkness below, but all I saw was the shadowy outline of the trees, their branches swaying gently in the wind. Then, without warning, I heard a rustle coming from the direction of the ladder. My instincts kicked in, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. Was it the same person I had seen earlier, with the flickering light? I took a cautious step forward, trying to get a better view. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. I called out softly, "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed slightly, swallowed by the vastness of the night. No answer came, just the faint whisper of the wind. I felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Part of me wanted to explore, while another part urged me to retreat back inside. Finally, I decided to take a step back, but just as I turned, I caught a glimpse of movement at the foot of the ladder. My heart skipped a beat. There, illuminated by the faintest hint of starlight, stood a figure. It was hard to make out any details, but their stance suggested they were watching me intently. I froze, the chill of the night creeping into my bones as I tried to process what was happening. The earlier encounter flashed through my mind. Was it a coincidence, or was this person somehow connected? With every passing second, the tension built, and I felt the urge to break the silence. "Who are you?" I called out again, voice steadier than I felt. The figure remained still, and just when I thought they might speak, the moment stretched on into an uncomfortable silence. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Was it safer to confront this mystery, or retreat back into the safety of my lookout? I stood there, listening for any sound, my heart racing. Slowly, I made my way along the walkway and peeked around the corner at the ladder. It was empty. My pulse quickened as I leaned over to look down. The ladder was deserted. Confusion and fear washed over me, leaving me momentarily stunned. Suddenly, I heard a flurry of footsteps approaching from behind on the wooden path. I caught a fleeting glimpse of a dark figure darting between the windows on the opposite side. Without a second thought, I climbed down the ladder as quickly as I could, my body trembling from the adrenaline, the fear of being chased looming above me. I was halfway down when I saw their head appear at the top. I didn't stop until I reached the ground and bolted into the woods. In hindsight, I couldn't understand why I'd grabbed my backpack when I went to investigate, but it turned out to be a lifesaver. With my flashlight and GPS in hand, I was able to navigate my way back to my car. As far as I could tell, I wasn't pursued. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. I had planned a simple weekend camping trip by a small lake, just a few days to unwind in the woods by the water. The first day went exactly as intended. I set up camp and relaxed the entire day and night. This spot was remote, accessible only by a narrow footpath that wasn't marked on any maps, so only locals would know about it. My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid. Throughout all my visits, both as a child and as an adult, I had never encountered another soul. In fact, there were no signs that anyone else had ever been there. On the second day, I wandered around the lake, lost in thought, circling it 3 or 4 times. The hours were blissfully quiet and peaceful. But then, during one of my laps, I noticed some footprints at the edge of the tree line. I had been walking the same path repeatedly and had never seen them before. They were so clear that I couldn't have missed them. What was unnerving was that they were barefoot prints, not shoe prints, and the area I was in didn't even have easy access to the water. They hadn't taken off their shoes for a swim, and I would have seen them in the lake. The discovery sent a chill down my spine. Why hadn't I noticed them while walking? Were they watching me, hiding from view? Paranoia crept in. The footprints seemed to lead from the tree line toward the lake before disappearing back into the woods. I didn't want to venture into that unknown territory, so I returned to my campsite, constantly scanning the tree line for any sign of life. But I saw nothing. As the sun began to set, the paranoia began creeping in again. There was something unsettling about those footprints, and the thought that they might still be nearby was anything but reassuring. As darkness fell, I stoked my campfire with plenty of wood and settled around it, trying everything possible to distract myself, though it was a tough task. A part of me felt justified in my unease, while another part wondered if I was simply overreacting. But then, not long into the night, I heard footsteps approaching from the trees. Instinctively, I turned to face the source of the sound. It was more than one person. At least two figures were slowly making their way toward my campsite. I fixated on them until they stepped into the light. A man and a woman stood just at the edge of the fire's glow, barely visible except for their silhouettes. I couldn't discern their ages or much else about them. "Can I help you?" I called out, and the woman immediately bolted back into the woods, vanishing without a trace. The man, however, remained still, his gaze fixed ahead and not even glancing back at her. That's when I noticed he wasn't wearing any shoes. They were definitely the same pair I'd seen Buzz by the lake. I repeated my question, but he too turned and quietly retreated into the darkness. Inside I was spiraling. That encounter was the strangest and most unsettling experience I had ever faced. It felt almost unreal. I had no desire to linger in those woods for another moment. I quickly began packing my gear. I'm not someone who sticks around when things get weird. Luckily, my setup was easy to dismantle, so I had everything stashed in my bag within minutes. I didn't know where they had gone, but I didn't want to still be there if they returned. I kicked the unlit logs from the fire to let it die down quickly after I left. Then I dashed into the woods. The trek ahead would take nearly 2 hours. For the first 10 minutes, I was on high alert, uncertain if I was being followed. But as I put distance between myself and the campsite, I began to feel a bit better. About 40 minutes into my walk, the woods were eerily silent. Not even crickets were chirping, when I suddenly heard running footsteps nearby. They were about 100 feet away, and I was sure it was a person. Though I couldn't see anything, I pressed on. Just a few minutes later, I heard it again, this time on my other side. The footsteps were faint, which made me think they were running barefoot, likely the same two I had seen by the lake. If they had been tracking me this far into the woods, I couldn't imagine what they meant to do. For a while, I kept hearing those distant running footsteps, short bursts, as if they were stealthily stalking me, then sprinting away. Nothing could have been more terrifying than that walk through the woods. Yet, somehow I made it back to my truck. I escaped. I wish I had more answers, or could identify who that man and woman were, or what they were doing out there. But I have nothing. Maybe I'm losing my mind. But sometimes I wonder if they were even real. I don't know, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to find out. I've never returned. I closed the windows and snuggled into bed, listening to the rain gently tapping on the roof. Its steady rhythm made it easier to drift off to sleep. Just as I began to relax, a faint noise outside caught my attention. It was hard to distinguish over the sound of the rain, but it was unmistakably there, a rustling, as if something was moving through the underbrush. My heart raced, but I tried to reassure myself it was just an animal. I took a deep breath and shut my eyes, hoping to fall asleep, despite the unsettling atmosphere. Then I heard it again, closer this time. I sat up, straining to listen, but the rain drowned out the sound. I told myself to calm down, reminding myself I was safe in my van. Yet the unease lingered. Eventually, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching me. I decided to take a peek out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Slowly, I lifted the curtain and looked outside, but all I saw was darkness and rain-soaked trees. Just as I was about to lower the curtain, I noticed a shadow flit between the trees. It was quick, almost a blur, but it sent chills down my spine. I stepped back from the window, heart racing, unable to shake the sensation of not being alone. The rest of the night was restless. Each time I thought I could relax, another sound would jolt me awake. I eventually dozed off, but it felt like I was constantly waking up to check the windows and listen for any signs of movement outside. When morning finally arrived, the rain had eased, leaving the world outside oddly quiet. I packed my things, eager to leave that spot behind. As I drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the trees, wondering what had truly been lurking in the dark. I shut the windows and pulled down the shades, plunging the inside into near darkness. Climbing under the covers, I tried to drift off to sleep. Normally, that was never a problem for me, but tonight was different. Sleep eluded me. After about an hour, the rain intensified, and thunder began to rumble, making it impossible to relax. A couple of hours into the night, amidst the relentless storm, I could have sworn I heard something rustling outside. It was faint, but distinct enough to make my heart race. It sounded like someone or something was running and knocking over branches just outside my van. The moment I heard it, silence fell. The darkness was so thick that I couldn't even make out the ground beneath my window. The longer I stared into that blackness, the more uneasy I felt, as if I were being watched. I quickly pulled the window cover back down, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. But less than a minute later, I heard a voice, a male whisper, urgent and low, as if he were speaking to someone else. I sat frozen, too frightened to peek out again, knowing they might see me if they hadn't already. They could easily suspect someone was inside, which only heightened my fear. For a tense few minutes, all I could hear was the rain and thunder until suddenly something shifted outside the sliding door of the van. I heard the unsettling sound of plastic bending, like someone was pressing against the side of the van. Then came a knock. A few seconds later, another one followed. Though I was certain they knew I was inside, I was too terrified to respond. Maybe they were unsure of how many people were in here, or even whether I was a man or a woman. So I decided it was safer to stay silent. An agonizing 5 minutes passed, with the knocking continuing every few seconds, accompanied by the storm's fury. They must have been soaked by now, and probably couldn't see a thing. Then, finally, they spoke. "Sheriff's Department, open up." What? I couldn't believe it. If that were true, why hadn't they said so right away? They kept knocking and calling out, insisting they were officers and urging me to open the door. It felt like a desperate ploy to get me to comply without resorting to force. I cautiously lifted the window cover and peered out. All I could discern was a dark figure near the door, but from its shape, it didn't look like someone in law enforcement gear. My gut told me this was about to take a turn for the worse. I wrestled with my thoughts for 30 agonizing seconds as the knocking grew more impatient. Finally, I decided to take the risk and move to the driver's seat to drive away. As soon as I started the engine, I heard 2 pairs of footsteps rushing toward the van. I was pulling out just as a figure appeared in the window beside me. Thank goodness the van didn't get stuck, and I managed to hit the trail. As I sped away, I didn't see any other vehicles on the road, making me uneasy about the intentions of those unknown individuals. I reported the incident to the county, but naturally, they informed me that no officers were dispatched that night, and I never received any follow-up. Things could have escalated. The situation out there was pretty dire, but thankfully, nothing else has happened since. I reside in a typical suburban town on the East Coast that has a strong anti-drug stance. The presence of police, especially unmarked undercover officers, what we call ghosts, is quite ridiculous for a town that's mostly crime-free, aside from some kids smoking weed now and then. There are unmarked police vehicles of all kinds, from sleek new Chevy sedans and hatchbacks to shiny Cadillac pickups and SUVs, Dodge Chargers, GMC and Ford SUVs, vintage Ford Grand Victorias, Jeep Wranglers, even fake taxi cabs, just about every vehicle you can imagine. With so many unmarked police cars around, many often get decommissioned and sold as used cars, still resembling their former lives as police vehicles. A friend of mine even owns a decommissioned Ford Grand Victoria. Last week, after a date in an unfamiliar area, I was driving home around midnight. I was sticking to the speed limit when I noticed a blatant undercover cop tailgating me on a mostly empty road. He followed me for about 5 miles before finally turning on his lights. I was anxious. I had never been pulled over before, and being out after 11 p.m. isn't exactly permitted for minors in my town. Plus, I had a small stash of illegal herbs tucked under my spare tire in the trunk. Given my town's notoriously strict police force, I felt a wave of apprehension wash over me. Still, I pulled off into an abandoned gas station, ready with my documents. The officer approached my window, clad in his police uniform, and I couldn't help but notice he was surprisingly attractive, probably in his early 20s, with longer blonde hair than most cops. He leaned way too far into my small car and asked where I was headed and if I knew why I was being pulled over. I told him I didn't, and he smirked, saying, "I do," before taking my license, registration, and proof of insurance back to his car. The street light illuminated his unmarked vehicle, and I glanced at it in my rearview mirror. It had a civilian license plate and no police badge in sight. I also noticed that his pants were comically short, the bell-bottoms awkwardly exposing several inches of his ankles. I had a really bad feeling about the whole encounter, but I remained in my car. He returned and asked me to pull around behind the gas station building. I hesitated, but agreed, though my instincts were screaming at me. There was no real reason to go behind the building other than to conceal our cars from view. As he walked back to his vehicle, I rolled down my window and dialed 911, reporting the suspicious police car and relaying the license plate number. The operator told me it couldn't possibly be a legitimate police car and urged me to leave the area immediately and find a public space. Following her advice, I drove behind the building with him trailing me. Then I made a break for the road. He turned on his lights and began to follow me. I was still on the phone with 911, but the operator wasn't providing any helpful guidance. I found myself trying to outrun this chase in my 1994 Nissan, 0 to 60 in about 20 minutes, while sobbing uncontrollably. I sped down a road I didn't know at 75 miles per hour, faster than I had ever driven, and my car started shaking violently. The officer maintained a steady pursuit behind me, lights flashing but no sirens blaring. My poor car howls and wails as I blaze through a red light. Once I make the turn, I realize I'm on the main road that weaves through my town. I know exactly where I am now. This road is buzzing with traffic, and I have my fingers hovering over the horn. It's just a button. I'm darting past irate drivers at 60 miles per hour on a 40 miles per hour road, hoping to catch the eye of a real police officer, since I know they often lurk here to catch speeders. Finally, I approach an old diner that's been closed for years, right in front of my neighborhood. I whip into the parking lot, fully aware that I've never passed that diner without spotting a hidden police car. I stop and scan the area frantically. No one is in sight. I've never experienced such a profound feeling of despair. I thought I was going to die. When I entered that parking lot, I expected to find my hero waiting for me. But instead, I was alone in an empty lot. The only sounds were the furious protests of my engine, and I was certain it wouldn't start again if I tried. I froze, unsure how long I sat there, my knuckles pale from gripping the steering wheel. I only turned around when I heard a car door slam, convinced it was the end. I glanced in the mirror, bracing myself to see the dreaded fake cops in their short pants. Instead, I was met with 3 marked police cars, 5 or 6 officers emerging with their hands on their guns, looking concerned. They took me to the station, listened to my story, and helped calm my nerves. It turned out the fake police car had given up the chase when I turned into the parking lot, probably scared that a real cop was hiding there. They commended my quick thinking for calling 911 and shared that there had been a string of violent rapes, one resulting in a girl's death in a neighboring state, all involving a car that matched my description. To my knowledge, they haven't caught him yet. This story belongs to my mother and serves as a cautionary tale about how twisted some cops can be. Back in high school during the 80s, my mom lived with her mother and younger brother after her parents divorced. With minimal contact with her father, she grew into a rebellious teenager, frequently smoking weed, drinking, and sneaking out to parties. One night, she snuck out with friends, and after drinking heavily, they decided to drive off around midnight. My mom always stops right here to remind my brother, sister, and me to never drink and drive. It was likely obvious they were intoxicated when a cop pulled them over. Growing up in a small American town, quintessentially rural, with miles of farmland, where everyone knew each other and high school football reigned supreme, my mom was part of a community of about 5,000 people. When the police stopped them, panic set in among my mom and her friends. One even started to cry. Composed as she is, my mom had the sense to glance back. She noticed two cops, one approaching the car while the other remained in the cruiser. She tried to find. As the man approaches, the dim light conceals his features. He strolls over and leans in to speak to the girls through the open window. My mom breathes a sigh of relief when she recognizes him. It's Mr. Nelson, a stout man in his 40s who attends her church. In her tipsy state, she hopes they might get off with just a warning, perhaps even without him informing her parents. Mr. Nelson looks directly at my mom. "Enjoying your night, Miss Kelvin?" he inquires. My mom forces a smile, feeling a mix of anxiety and embarrassment. "Sorry, Mr. Nelson. We must have been a distraction for the driver. By now, she's gotten pretty good at bending the truth." But Mr. Nelson seems skeptical. He requests the usual driver's license and registration, then asks everyone to exit the vehicle before heading back to his cruiser. "Oh no," my mom's friend whispers urgently. "We're going to get tested." She reassures him, and they step out of the car. The officers start by asking some basic questions, standard procedure for evaluating whether someone is intoxicated. Mr. Nelson and his partner, a man my mom doesn't recognize, instruct the girls to stand by their car, ensuring a good distance between them. When my mom glances back, she notices the slightest smile on Mr. Nelson's face. "All right, ladies," he says. "There are two paths we can take." He turns to his partner, and they exchange a knowing grin. "We could take you home and tell your parents everything, or," his grin widens, "you could do something for us." A shiver runs down my mom's spine. She doesn't like the sound of that. "What do you mean?" one of her friends asks. Mr. Nelson's smile grows, not sinister, but rather filled with self-satisfaction. "I can't help but worry about what might come next." My mom's heart races. Everything goes quiet for a moment, broken only by the smug expressions on their faces and a low chuckle from the other officer. She can hardly believe this is happening. The Mr. Nelson she knows, who she sees regularly and whose kids go to school with hers, is suggesting they strip in front of him. "What do you want from us?" my mom manages to ask. Mr. Nelson gazes at her with a predatory look. "Oh, come on. This doesn't have to turn out badly. Just show us a little skin, and we can pretend this never happened." My mom and her friends initially refuse. There's no way they would ever agree to that, regardless of the potential consequences. But Mr. Nelson's demeanor shifts, darkening. "I don't think you grasp the situation," he growls. "Now, why don't you be accommodating and do it?" His voice sends chills through them. His tone and aggressive stance make my mom pale with fear, anxious about what they might do if they don't comply. Reluctantly, my mom and her friends give in. They strip completely and stand exposed. The officers laugh, clearly relishing the moment. My mother won't reveal what happened next, and I really don't want to know. All I understand is that eventually the cops had the girls lean against their car. It was in that moment that she managed to connect with her friends. One of them was crying. It was a tense situation, and she nearly got caught trying to grab his attention. They all agreed to count to 3 and then sprint into the cornfield to their right, where they could hide and make their escape. They successfully dashed deep into the cornfield, just as Mr. Nelson lunged for one of her friends, but she skillfully dodged him. Surprisingly, the cops didn't even attempt to follow them into the field. They simply hopped back in their car and drove off in a reckless hurry. After waiting a full 10 minutes to make sure the police weren't returning, they made their way back to their car, changed clothes, and headed straight home. In the days that followed, Mr. Nelson never brought up the incident, and they chose not to report it either. If they had, he would have just claimed they were drunk. And being a respected member of the community, no one would have believed the girls. This was the 80s, a time when nothing would have changed for them. And if anything, it would have turned their lives into a nightmare. Occasionally at church, she would spot Mr. Nelson, who would flash her a smug smile and wink. It's true. You never really know what lies behind the facade of even the most upstanding individuals. To Mr. Nelson, I hope you're out there riding somewhere. 2 summers ago, after a day trip for my son's birthday party, we stopped at a water park and ended up having dinner in a tiny town after getting slightly lost, thanks to Google Maps. While we were finishing up, we noticed a county fair across the street, so we decided to check it out for some fun. It was getting dark, and the fair was winding down, but we managed to catch the start of a tractor pull. It was our first time at such an event, and we thought it would be a nice way to wrap up the birthday celebration. We settled into the bleachers and watched, surrounded by families and a fair number of intoxicated attendees. I didn't think much of it since I had my 16-year-old son and a strong friend with me, making me feel secure. We chose to leave the fair before it got too late to avoid the roads with drunk drivers. After walking back to the now-closed restaurant, we jumped into my car and prepared to head home. As we retraced our route with Google Maps, I noticed that a car had started following us right after we left the restaurant. It was the only other vehicle on the road, likely because most of the town's residents were either at the fair or at home. The car continued to follow us onto the back road I recognized, which struck me as odd, since it was a desolate path flanked by woods. I thought perhaps the driver was also from out of town, taking the same shortcut to the interstate, as summer often brings road trips. Still, an uneasy feeling settled over me, so I aimed to get off that road and onto the interstate as quickly as possible. As we drove along the hilly back road, the darkness enveloped us, and I took it slow, wary of any deer that might leap into our path. The car remained right behind me, so I reduced my speed significantly, hoping to annoy the driver into passing me. Instead, he stayed close, tailgating me. From what I could see, there was just one person in the car, and the windows were tinted. I decided to speed up, eager to reach a main road or the interstate, but he continued to follow closely behind me. Arrive at our location. A wave of relief washed over me as the officer listened carefully. My heart was still racing from what had just happened, but knowing that help was on the way provided a comforting sense of safety. My son, who had been quiet during the entire ordeal, finally spoke up, asking if we were safe now. I reassured him that everything would be all right. While waiting for backup, I kept my eyes on the road, half expecting to see the car that had been following us. My friend stayed close, ready to step in if needed. The officer collected our information and asked for a description of the car and the driver. I shared every detail I could remember, hoping it would aid in catching the person who had scared us. We waited anxiously, scanning the surroundings for any sign of that vehicle. After what felt like forever, more police arrived, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for their presence. I started searching for this guy. After leaving the gas station, I called a friend to follow me to a parking lot where I parked my car for the night. I didn't want this guy to track me down by spotting my car at my house. For a long while after that, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, and every time I spotted a white car of that make and model on the streets, my heart raced. Thankfully, we escaped unharmed. The most unsettling part of this story is that the small town where it all happened is home to one of the largest mental health asylums in the Midwest. That thought has kept me awake many nights, and I still check the news for any stories about escapees. This incident took place in 2009 when I was 22, leaving my home state of California to start a corrections job in the East. I was driving down the loneliest stretch of highway around 3 a.m. on a Sunday. They call it the loneliest highway for a reason. I hadn't seen another person for at least half an hour. I was feeling drowsy, but not tired enough to pull over for a nap. Suddenly, I spotted a broken-down car on the roadside. As I slowed down, I noticed a woman standing next to it. I approached her cautiously, only rolling down my window a little. Something about her felt off. I couldn't quite pinpoint it then, but now I realize my instincts were screaming danger. I asked if she needed me to call a tow truck or AAA, but she immediately tried to open my door. I told her I wasn't comfortable letting her in, but I'd wait for a tow truck to arrive. In response, her face twisted with rage as she began to berate me. "You're a big man. What am I going to do?" She accused me of being cruel for not letting her in. Looking back, I see where I went wrong. I hesitated and unlocked my door, feeling guilty. She was only 5 feet 2 inches, and I'm over 6 feet tall, with at least 100 pounds on her. She looked to weigh about 90 pounds. Once she slipped inside, I asked who I could call for help. This was 10 years ago, and I had a little BlackBerry slide phone back then. She said she'd rather I just give her a ride to the next town. That's when I began to realize I had made a mistake. She was avoiding eye contact and fumbling through her purse. As I suggested calling for help, she started getting aggressive, insisting I take her to the next town. I was so focused on trying to fix the situation that I didn't notice a man hiding near her car. It wasn't until he was almost at my driver's side door that I caught a glimpse of him in my mirror. My fight or flight instincts kicked in, and I shifted into drive, speeding off just as he reached for my car door. As I took off, I heard a pinging sound, and my mirror shattered. He was shooting at me. The adrenaline kicked in, and I was speeding close to 90. By this point, the girl, likely in some drugged state, realized her plan was failing. She began hitting me, demanding I stop and let her out. Once I felt I had enough distance, I pulled over and insisted she get out. She reached for her oversized purse, but I had reached my limit. Shaking with adrenaline, I opened the door and practically shoved her out. I tried to grab her purse, but she managed to hang on to it. Just before, I dumped half of the contents onto my passenger seat and took off with my door still ajar. Once I had put some distance between us, I slammed it shut and locked it. I gripped the steering wheel and drove, but it wasn't until I pulled into a Denny's later that morning that I realized how close I had come to danger. I had a good cry for a moment, then noticed a bunch of her stuff scattered across my passenger seat, mostly crumpled napkins, a few lipsticks, and some drug paraphernalia. I considered calling the police or flagging down a highway patrol officer, but instead, I made a rash decision. I tossed everything that had fallen into a trash bag and threw it away. At the time, I aspired to be an officer myself, and I knew that being caught with drug paraphernalia could jeopardize my dreams. I doubted they would believe me when I said it wasn't mine. I spotted a cop at the gas station across from the Denny's and told him what had happened. He scolded me for stopping and letting her in, promising to look into it, though I doubted he would. I was so shaken that I barely touched my pancakes before leaving to continue my journey. I never replaced that mirror and ended up selling my car. Even now, a decade later, I hesitate to stop and assist stranded motorists. This incident happened when I was a teenager, and it still lingers in my mind. I was babysitting my neighbor, Alice, a routine I had grown comfortable with since I did it almost every weekend. Rarely, Alice would have a friend over, and that night, her first-time sleepover guest, Jennifer, seemed a bit nervous. I did my best to make her feel at ease. Alice's parents went to bed around 6:30 p.m., setting the alarm as they left. I bathed both girls and tucked them into bed to watch Nickelodeon, following our usual routine. Once they were settled, I headed to the kitchen for snacks. It was pouring rain outside, and adjacent to the kitchen was a breakfast nook with glass doors and windows. As I was about to return to the room, the phone rang. Alice's parents called often, so I answered promptly. "Hi, how are you?" a male voice asked. "I'm doing well," I replied. Are you calling for Jason, Alice's father?" "He isn't home, but I can take a message." "Maybe," he said. Or maybe I'm calling to talk to you now." At that moment, my instincts didn't kick in, and I assumed it was a family member or a bored friend wanting to chat. I politely explained that I had to go because the girls were asking for their snacks, and I hung up. After bringing Alice and Jennifer their treats, I was about to settle into the recliner in Alice's room when the phone rang again. I rushed back to answer it, not thinking anything was amiss. At least not yet. "You know, it's rude to hang up on people, don't you?" he began, his tone neither angry nor aggressive. The thunder and rain made it hard to hear, and both girls were calling for me because they were scared of the storm. "I'm sorry," I said. "I have to get back to the girls. Have a nice night." I heard him say something else, but I hung up before I could catch it. The phone rang once more. "Please don't hang up on me," he said, his voice laced with anger, but I cut the call again. My nerves were starting to fray. I returned to the room with the girls just as the phone rang again. At that moment, Alice was pleading with me not to leave her, so I ignored it. The phone continued to ring relentlessly. Finally, after a tense 10 minutes, it rang once more. Thinking it might be Alice's parents, I stepped away from the girls to answer. "You expletive, don't you dare hang up on me," he shouted. "Leave me alone. If you call again, I'll call the cops, you psycho," I shouted back before slamming down the phone. Turning around, I saw Alice and Jennifer standing behind me, their faces pale with fear. To lighten the mood, I suggested we grab some ice cream bars from the freezer. As I headed towards the freezer, the phone rang again. This time, Alice picked it up. I couldn't make out what was being said, but I could hear screaming, and Alice's face was filled with terror. I snatched the phone from her, ready to confront him when he said, "Nice pink shirt you've got on." I hung up and suddenly recognized that not only was I indeed wearing a pink shirt, but during that second call, I had heard a clap of thunder simultaneously on the phone and in the house. It was then that a wave of realization washed over me. As a teenager, I felt invincible and oblivious to danger, but a sharper instinct kicked in, guiding my next moves. I flipped the light switch in the kitchen, illuminating most of the media area, then gathered both girls and their barking dog, Alex, and we all squeezed into the pantry. The pantry door opened inward, so I pressed against the shelves and shoved a massive bag of rice against the door. With my back against the shelf and my feet bracing the rice to secure the door, I held a girl in each arm, covering their mouths. I wedged the dog between my legs, and although he barked incessantly, he somehow sensed the need for silence. As the alarm blared and the phone rang again, we were all shaking, but I was determined to keep my composure for the girls. Between the alarm and the storm outside, it was hard to hear anything. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a woman's voice asking if anyone was in the house. She stood in front of the pantry, announcing she was a police officer and that it was safe to come out. Clearly aware I wouldn't just take her word for it, she slid her badge under the door. I shifted my foot from the bag of rice and carefully held her badge closer. The police had turned on the lights, and I could see the glow streaming in under the pantry door, confirming it was indeed a badge. Cautiously, I stepped out of the pantry, shielding the girls behind me. Officer Wesley appeared completely unfazed, and I soon understood why. "It's frightening when alarms go off," she said, "but next time, you should answer the phone and inform the alarm company everything is all right, instead of hiding. Sending officers to a house is serious business." I looked at her, bewildered. "We didn't trigger the alarm," I stammered, tears starting to spill. "We haven't opened any doors." She regarded me with confusion before asking, "Then who made those footprints? From the back door, through the sliding glass door, in the kitchen nook to the pantry, and out of—" Muddy footprints marked the front door, and in front of the pantry, several prints suggested that someone had been anxiously pacing there. The trail led out of the front door, which remained ajar when the police arrived. I was in a frenzy, prompting the officers to call Jason and Janelle, Alice's parents, to come home from the restaurant. I could hear them murmuring in hushed tones, clearly not meant for my ears. Officer Wesley's partner mentioned that the door in the nook had been forcibly opened. Looking out over the pool deck, I could see where the footprints had begun in the grass and then trailed into the house. The rain had mostly washed them away, but it was clear someone had walked from the side of Alice's house toward the glass door. We waited for Alice's parents to return before I left. As the police recounted the night's events, I couldn't shake the feeling that neither of Alice's parents seemed as terrified as I expected, given the circumstances. The officers escorted me home and explained everything to my parents, who were both extremely upset. For several weeks, additional officers patrolled the neighborhood, but they never caught the culprit, nor did he ever resurface, and I never babysat for Alice again. I was far too shaken. Fast forward a few years, and I learned that Jason, Alice's father, had gone to prison for tax evasion. At least, that's what we were told. Years later, while visiting home, I ran into Jason as he was leaving on his motorcycle. He stopped to chat, and I finally asked the question that had gnawed at me for years. Did you really go to jail for tax evasion? By then, Jason and Janelle were divorced. She had left him for her late sister's husband, which was pretty dark. Jason didn't seem to care about maintaining any facade. He admitted that he had not been jailed for tax evasion, but for drug trafficking. He shared a thrilling story about being caught in a high-speed chase and boasted about being one of the largest dealers in the area until he was apprehended. It hit me then that the person he was talking to that night was likely after him for some sort of retribution. Perhaps it was a rival dealer, or maybe Jason had crossed someone he worked for. This explained why Jason and Janelle hadn't appeared as alarmed as they should have been. By some miracle, combined with an alarm system, we had escaped harm that night. Deep down, I knew Jason's choices had led to those frightening events. That realization still haunts me and shaped my understanding of my own mortality and the darkness that can reside in others. I'm not overly paranoid, but I am cautious, and rightly so. My reckless teenage escapades mostly came to a halt after that. When I was in high school, around 16, I had friends named Lisa and Zoe. Lisa came from a wealthy family, and her sprawling house was right next to our school. During breaks, we often went to her place, and we had many sleepovers there. One night, it was just the three of us and Lisa's little sister, Anna, while their mother was out. We slipped into our pajamas and settled in to watch scary movies for hours. Anna went to bed before us, and we remained in the living room, engrossed in the TV. Suddenly, the alarm went off. Sometimes it happens that the alarm goes off unexpectedly, so Lisa just goes to turn it off, and that should be the end of it. But about 10 minutes later, it blares again, catching us off guard, since it's not meant to do that. The alarm was supposed to activate only when a human approached, given that our house is nestled deep in the forest. We all knew animals occasionally wandered by. It had happened before. When the alarm was set up, it was specifically calibrated to detect humans only. This was the second time it had gone off, and unease began to creep in. We headed upstairs and opened the windows to scan the garden, but saw nothing. We even ventured out onto the balcony in the dead of night, still finding nothing. At one point, I found myself alone on the balcony when the alarm blared, again triggering the automatic lights around the swimming pool. That meant something was near the pool, and I was directly above it. Fear overwhelmed me, and I dropped to my knees, remaining there until my friend finally disabled the alarm and the lights, prompting me to dash back inside. By this time, we were genuinely afraid and started speculating about what or who could be lurking around. If it were a human, our lights would have illuminated our location, so we decided to turn off all the lights and huddled together in the kitchen, sans phones. I couldn't tell you why none of us thought to grab at least one phone. So there we were, in total darkness, terrified, in this vast house with windows everywhere we looked. The alarm went off again, and Anna screamed. Lisa took her by the hand, reassuring her as they made their way to turn off the alarm for good. This left me and Zoe in the kitchen, scanning our surroundings. The alarm was upstairs, which meant the two girls were far from us. Suddenly, we heard footsteps right behind us, just beyond the wall in the garden. They were quick and purposeful, as if whoever it was knew exactly where they were headed. We froze, waiting in the dark, and jumped when we saw someone walk by the door and window directly in front of us. We thought it was a man. His light offered a brief glimpse of his silhouette. So, there were at least two individuals moving around the house for about 20 or 30 minutes. Just a detail, but that door I mentioned was a sliding one with Venetian blinds, and they were wide open. We remained still, while the girls upstairs were so frightened that they stayed put. At least that's what they told us later. Suddenly, we heard one voice, then another. I couldn't make out the words, but I definitely heard them. Then, out of nowhere, a bright light shone directly in our faces. We were completely paralyzed, unable to move, scream, or say a word. We were frozen in fear as the light lingered, indicating someone was watching us through the blinds. Someone was observing us in our terror and simply stayed there. Then, a loud noise erupted from the front door, which was still shut. We didn't budge, but something inside me snapped back to reality. I crawled to the back door in front of me, closed the blinds, and braced myself against the door in case the person outside tried to force their way in. Honestly, I'm small and thin. My little frame probably wouldn't hold up well, but I did it anyway. Meanwhile, the person at the front door continued trying to get in, and Zoe remained frozen in place. The girl upstairs was up to something I couldn't quite figure out. Meanwhile, the one right outside my window started banging on the door, trying to force it open. Though it was shut tight, I grabbed the handle and held on for dear life. The banging continued, and while it felt like it went on for hours in my mind, I think it only lasted a few seconds. Eventually, the noise at the front door stopped. Moments later, the girl in front of me ceased her attempts too. Then, Lights started flickering everywhere. The alarm, useless. Zoe and I ended up sleeping in the kitchen along with the two sisters upstairs. Nothing happened at all. It was over. The next day, Lisa's and Anna's mom returned home, and we filled her in on everything. We got a bit of a scolding for not calling the police. At the time, I took it the wrong way, but I understand her frustration now. She called the cops, who came to investigate, and found footprints all around the house, muddy ones and scuff marks on the front door. They suggested someone had kicked it. They theorized it was likely just some guys scouting the neighborhood to figure out which houses to rob, a common occurrence given the many large, beautiful homes filled with valuable items. What I can't wrap my head around is why they turned aggressive. Initially, they were just wandering around, and if they were merely looking for something, they should have left once they realized we were home, or at least when the guy saw us in the kitchen. Instead, the moment they spotted us, they got hostile and tried to break into our home. I can't say for sure if they intended to rob us, and honestly, I don't want to know. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to spend another night in that house. The fear of them returning kept me awake. Lisa was a little upset, as if she didn't quite get it, but she hadn't seen them herself. She had stayed upstairs with her sister. I understand her perspective, but it frustrated me that she couldn't grasp my fear. I was around 8 years old at the time, while my sister was 12 or 13. We lived in a tiny place we called the Shack, which our mom had moved us into after her split from our dad. It was all we could afford. My sister and I shared a small bedroom, but the house did have a big backyard with a large above-ground pool and deck for play. We had a tall privacy fence, and being the curious kid I was, I loved to climb some of the wooden boards to peek at the neighbors. I recognized the two boys living diagonally across from us because they went to my school. Every day, I made it a point to climb up the side of my fence to chat with them. I never actually scaled over, just climbed high enough to look over and talk. They had an uncle named Randy, who was probably in his 20s or 30s, and he often worked in their backyard, so I got to know him too. My sister and I would hang on the fence and chat with him most days. Our conversations were always innocent, and he seemed like a nice guy. Looking back, however, I can see some red flags about him. I remember one time while playing basketball, we accidentally tossed the ball over our fence. We offered to retrieve it for him, but he insisted on getting it himself, effortlessly hopping over the fence. At the time, it seemed innocent enough, but I now wonder if he was testing how easily he could scale it. One day, my sister casually mentioned that our mom worked the night shift, leaving just the two of us home alone at night. That was all he needed to hear. Not long after, one night I woke up to the sound of my sister crying. We shared a bunk bed, with me on the bottom. When I stood up, I found her out of bed, leaning against the wall on the phone and sobbing. I asked what was wrong, but she insisted she was fine and told me to go back to sleep. So I did. The next day, I found out what had happened. In the middle of the night, while our mom was at work, Randy had jumped the fence and attempted to break in. He banged on my sister's bedroom window, demanding she let him in. She refused, but he persisted, walking around the house, banging on windows, yelling, and trying all the doors. That's when she called 911, and I woke up. I have no idea how I slept through all that noise, especially since she said he was pounding on the window right by her bed. But I guess kids can sleep like logs. By the time the police arrived, he had already jumped back into his yard. They knocked on his door, but he denied everything. The officers said there was nothing they could do, and they left, visibly shaken by the incident. Since my mom couldn't change her work schedule, we started staying at our dad's house at night. A few years went by without any trouble, and I had completely stopped talking to the boys next door. Then it happened again. Guess who slept through it all once more? My sister, now a couple of years older, had friends over for a sleepover one night. We had a sliding glass door to the backyard near where they were sitting. The door had vertical blinds, but one was broken, leaving a gap. As they were playing board games, one of my sister's friends suddenly froze and said, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy standing at your sliding glass door." They all turned to see Randy, his face pressed against the glass, watching them. Naturally, chaos erupted, and 911 was called, just like before. He jumped the fence again, but when the police arrived, they said they couldn't prove anything, even though the girls described his outfit, which he was still wearing when they questioned him. That was the last straw for us. We moved out of our house and got a restraining order against him. He didn't show up for court, so the judge automatically granted it. I never saw him again. The last time I checked, I found out he's currently in prison for a variety of charges. Now, I work at a data center in a small warehouse, where my job is simply to monitor the screens and ensure everything runs smoothly. A thump echoed from one of the storage aisles, louder and clearer this time, causing me to jump in my seat. I paused the show, a knot tightening in my stomach. I tried to reassure myself that it was just the building settling or perhaps some equipment shifting, but the sound felt too intentional for that. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and cautiously navigated the corridors. As I neared the aisle where I heard the noise, a chill crept down my spine. I peeked around the corner, half expecting to find someone or something there. But the aisle was deserted. I lingered for a moment, straining to catch any additional sounds. The silence was overwhelming. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to check the section where I had plugged the cable back in, hoping to calm my nerves. I walked down the aisle, glancing at the systems and their indicators, all appearing to function normally. Just as I was about to head back, I heard it again. A soft thump, this time much closer, as if it were right behind me. My heart raced and I spun around, but there was still nothing there. I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that I wasn't alone in the warehouse. I hurried back to the office, shutting the door firmly behind me. I sat down, attempting to focus on the screen, but the unease lingered. My mind raced with thoughts of what might be hiding in the shadows of the vast building. I heard a couple of hurried footsteps racing down the corridor next to me, giving me a sudden jolt. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stood up and opened the door to peek down the hallway. It was empty, just a long stretch with a door at the far end. But the sounds had seemed so close, almost right outside my office. I knew I had to investigate to put my mind at ease. I walked toward the end and opened the door. As I stepped into the next hallway, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a door closing at the far end, as if someone had just slipped through it. My heart raced. I cautiously moved forward and opened that door, revealing a corridor lined with office doors. Is anyone in here? Hello? My voice bounced off the walls, but all I heard was an unsettling silence. It was unnervingly quiet in the building. Were they hiding in one of these offices? That thought sent a shiver down my spine, prompting me to retreat. Just as I took a step back, one of the office doors beside me swung open. I caught a brief view of a man darting out of the dark room before I turned and dashed away. His footsteps echoed behind me as I sprinted into the next corridor and up the staircase. Not wanting to risk being cornered, I took the fire exit and burst into the parking lot. Once I reached my car, I called the police. Strangely, the man didn't follow me out that way. The officers arrived quickly and conducted a thorough search of the building, which lasted nearly half an hour, but he had vanished. He must have escaped through another exit and into the woods behind the building. His presence explained a lot, including the disconnected wire I'd noticed earlier in the night, which he probably bumped into while sneaking around. My company launched an extensive investigation, reviewing security footage to determine how he got in and whether anything was stolen. I didn't get much information since I wasn't authorized, but it was clear that whatever he was up to, he didn't want me to know, and likely had plans to keep me quiet. Thankfully, I never had to find out how he intended to do that after leading me through those corridors. This incident happened a couple of years ago when I was juggling 2 jobs to save for a condo. I had a steady 9-to-5 job, but also did deliveries to earn some extra cash whenever I could. Some weeks, I found myself working around 30 hours just doing deliveries after my regular job. That night, I started my shift after dinner around 6:30. It was a pretty successful night, with plenty of good orders and even better tips. I should have taken the night off and given myself a break, but I was feeling greedy and wanted to keep the momentum going. By 11, things had really slowed down, and my last few orders were just average. Yet I was determined to end the night on a high note, so I kept driving around, waiting for a decent order to come through. Finally, one popped up, almost $20 for a delivery 15 minutes away. Who could resist that? After picking up the food, I set off for the address. The night was exceptionally quiet and serene, making for a smooth drive. However, I found myself heading into a wooded area of town that I hadn't even known contained homes. To be safe, I double-checked my route multiple times. When I reached the final turn, I found myself on a well-kept gravel road leading deeper into the forest. After driving a short distance, I came upon a gate, just 2 stone pillars with a chain draped between them. Fortunately, the chain was down, so I continued through. My headlights weren't great, limiting my visibility, but shortly after the gate, I arrived at a parking area. Confusion set in, as it clearly didn't lead to any house. I parked my car and glanced around through the windows. A sign at one end caught my attention. It turned out to be a forest preserve. I had delivered to parks before, but I thought forest preserves closed around 8 or 9, and there was no one around to receive the order. Just as I began to wonder what I was supposed to do, My phone rang. It was the customer. I answered, and a deep, gruff voice came through, almost difficult to understand. He mentioned he saw I had parked and asked if I could see him. I replied no, and he explained he was camping with friends down one of the trails and that I should be able to spot a campfire if I walked a bit closer. I agreed, realizing that this might explain the generous tip. I mentioned my concern about the preserve's closing times, but he assured me that overnight camping was permitted on certain days. Not being particularly outdoorsy, I didn't know much about it, and I didn't sense any reason for him to lie. I switched off my car and stepped outside with his bag of food, quickly realizing how dark it was and that I would need to use my phone as a flashlight. There was only one trail leading away from the parking area, so I couldn't really get lost. As I began walking, the silence was striking. I expected to hear the sounds of a group of guys joking and laughing, but instead it was just the rustling wind and chirping crickets. Then I spotted the light, a flickering orange flame glowing in the trees. Strangely, it wasn't on the path or even nearby. It was set back among the trees. I couldn't tell if there was a direct route to it, but I decided to head straight toward the flame. As I drew nearer, the scene became increasingly bizarre. For one, there were no voices, and when I got even closer, I saw no one around. Just a small campfire, burning alone in the middle of nowhere. No chairs, no tents, nothing. I barely had time to mutter, "What the hell?" under my breath before I heard a stick snap somewhere in the woods. I whipped my head around toward the sound. There was someone there, but too far away for the light to reach. I could only make out a vague figure standing still, as if trying to remain hidden. A wave of unease washed over me. Hey, I'm the delivery driver." "I'll just leave your order here," I called out, placing the bag on the ground. Just then, the figure stepped into the light and approached me. The man, he was tall, with dark hair and an unkempt beard. He apologized, saying he hadn't noticed me coming. It was that same deep, gravelly voice I'd heard on the phone. His smile felt unsettling, almost forced, and I found it strange that he only revealed himself once he realized I had spotted him. Nothing seemed quite right. I stumbled over my words, but as he approached, I made the decision to turn and run. He called out several times in a creepy, overly friendly manner, asking me to come back and that he had cash for me. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with my keys in my shaking hands as I hurried to get inside and start it. I backed out and turned onto the gravel path to leave, only to slam on the brakes. A chain now blocked the exit, latched across the pillars. I stared at it for what felt like too long, trying to figure out if I could get out and unlatch it or what my next move should be. Then I heard footsteps approaching from behind my car. Without looking back, I slammed the gas pedal, driving onto the grass and maneuvering around the pillars. It was a tight fit, because a shallow ditch was dangerously close to the sides. If I messed up, my car could slide down and get stuck. Once I was back on the gravel, I sped away. I had no idea who or what that was back there, but I felt foolish for not calling the police, even though I suspected they would have likely been long gone by then. The next morning, I did some digging and discovered that the forest preserve I had visited indeed closed at 8 p.m. and prohibited camping or campfires. To me, That confirmed the sinister nature of what I had encountered. What he intended to do remains a mystery that still haunts me as I reflect on what could have happened in the forest that night. In my mid-20s, I worked at a local pizza shop, a small place that did deliveries and had a few tables for dining in. Honestly, the food wasn't anything special. The only unique aspect was that it was open 24/7, attracting a mix of inebriated customers throughout the night. I often worked alone, which I preferred. The food was easy to prepare, and during slow periods, I could usually do whatever I wanted while waiting for orders. That night started out like any other. I arrived at 9 p.m. to take over for the day manager. There were no special tasks on the agenda, and since it was a Tuesday, I was bracing for a quiet evening. I prepped some workstations in the back and waited for orders. A few customers trickled in over the next couple of hours, but then it went completely silent. No walk-ins, no phone calls. I sat in a chair in the back of the kitchen, scrolling through my phone the entire time. Then, around 1 a.m., I heard the bell by the door ring, which chimed every time someone opened it. Curious, I got up and walked to the front counter, but as soon as I could see the main room, I stopped. Nobody was there. I stood still, glancing around, but there was absolutely no one in sight. A small smile crept across my face as I ventured further in to double-check that no one had come in. I found it amusing, as if I had become so accustomed to that sound all night that my mind was playing tricks on me. Convinced it was nothing, I returned to my chair in the kitchen and didn't think about it again. For the next 15 minutes, I didn't receive any calls or see any customers until I heard the bell chime again. This time, I wasn't even distracted by a video, so I knew it was real. I stood up and walked into the main room, only to stop in confusion once more. The place was empty. After a moment, I approached the front door, opened it, and peeked outside, scanning the sidewalk that ran alongside the building. There was no one around, not even a single car in the parking lot. I wouldn't say I was scared or freaked out, just really perplexed. I fiddled with the door for a bit, trying to see if it would ring without being opened, but no luck. It was definitely odd, and I had no idea what to make of it. I lingered by the front for a good 30 minutes, hoping the door would ring again, but it didn't. Eventually, I made my way back to the kitchen. It was between 2 and 3 a.m., the slowest time of night. True to form, just a few minutes after I returned, the door chimed again. This time, I stayed seated, listening for any signs of a visitor. I heard nothing, so I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" but received no answer. I figured it was just the door acting up again, so I brushed it off and got back to my phone. Surprisingly, there wasn't a single customer for a whole hour after that. The last 3 hours had been completely dead. By 4 a.m., I had to start prepping for the next shift. I walked back to the front and began counting the register from the few orders I had taken earlier. But while I was there, an unsettling feeling washed over me. I kept glancing at the empty room ahead and then back to the kitchen behind me as if I was being watched. I attributed it to the oddity of the night, especially with the door situation. I just wanted my shift to end. A couple more minutes passed when suddenly I heard a thud on the floor behind me. It sounded like a boot hitting the ground, and a chill ran down my spine as I quickly turned around. My breath caught in my throat. There was a man standing just 5 or 6 feet away. He wore tattered black clothes and a hoodie that obscured his face, leaving only his bloodshot, hollow eyes visible. Whether he was drunk, high, or something else, it was clear he wasn't in his right mind. I noticed his left hand gripped a knife, his knuckles white from the tension. I froze, trying to avoid escalating the situation. After several tense seconds of him just staring at me, I finally spoke up. "Hey, listen, you can take the cash from the register. I won't say anything. Just let me go, please," I pleaded, desperate to defuse the situation. But he stood there, still clutching the knife, with that vacant stare. I felt a surge of terror. He was clearly not a typical person, and I couldn't predict what he might do next. The L-shaped counter I was at extended toward him, meaning to escape. I would have to run a few feet toward him, then around the counter and back to the front door. With him just 5 feet away, he could easily grab me or strike if I tried to flee. So I opted for the next best thing. I basically leapt over the counter. It wasn't graceful, but it did the trick. I hit the ground hard and scrambled back to my feet just in time to see this guy charging at me, his face twisted with pure rage. I bolted out the door and barely got a few seconds ahead of him before I heard him rushing after me. Getting to my car, which was parked behind the building, was out of the question. I just kept running, hoping a passing car might stop to help. At some point, though, he stopped pursuing me. I couldn't tell you when that happened. All I could focus on was putting as much distance between us as possible. I called the police and waited on the road for them to arrive, which took about 5 minutes. By the time they got there, the guy had vanished. But it seemed he went back inside the shop and completely wrecked the place. Everything was in disarray, and he had exited through the back door, where he then dragged his knife along the side of my car. It felt like he was watching me from inside, using the door as a diversion, trying to slip away unnoticed. Honestly, it worked like a charm, and I felt pretty foolish for falling for it. It's unsettling to think that there was about an hour between the last time the door chimed and my encounter with him, meaning he was likely hiding in the shop all along. What's really bizarre is that I had no clue who he was. I thought he was just some random guy, but his behavior seemed oddly personal. Maybe it was just a case of wrong place, wrong time. I really don't know. They never caught him, and I didn't stick around at that job for long after that. I was too worried he might return.